Have you ever played a game that left you fundamentally different? A game that stuck with you so profoundly that when you saw the credits roll, you felt a twinge of longing to experience it all over again, but knew you never could? It's a feeling so painful that you almost wish you never had it in the first place, because you know you'll never get that high again. For me, that game is what some would consider the most mysterious video game of all time, Tycoon Edge. Just a glance at this game's visuals is bound to make your skin crawl and elicit the question, is this a real game? Or some kind of early 3D animation meant to showcase some piece of hardware decades ago? And why does it look like that? I assure you, this is a real game, because I own a copy. One of the only people to do so, in fact. Search this title far and wide. You'll find nary a detail on its story, not a clue on its production team, and ixnay on how the game is actually played. Not even in the game's native country of Japan. It was an ultra-obscure release on the 3DO, a console that's reputation for failure precedes its library of games. The few who are aware of the game are just as spellbound as I am by its uniqueness.
Yeah, it's more interesting due for vibe-based reasons. It's kind of a harder sell for some people, but...
What little we do know are the names of the companies that developed and produced it, and its year of release, 1995, making this a 30-year-old mystery that not a single soul has solved. For months now, I've been researching and gathering information and evidence for this topic, and now I finally know the answers. What if I told you this title was something that eventually inspired the creation of one of the most iconic RPG franchises decades later? It sounds outrageous, but I promise that it's true. This game has done things that have never really been seen in the gaming industry before or since, both for the greater good and the unfathomably terrible. There is no other game like Tycoon Edge. I absolutely promise you, my nearly 2 decades of playing games, I've never seen anything like it. I'm not just regaling the in-game story and how I felt about it. This video is far more than that. This is a tale of a failed video game console, the hardships one developer went through to make this game, the story of how a young man fell in love with this game back in 1995, and how it inspired him to create the games he once loved, how history could have been changed by a single game, and how it all ties into my story. Because decades from now on my channel is a distant memory of my youth, Tycoon Edge will be something that brings me some small comfort, as well as nighttime torments as my weary joints ache in the cold Canadian winters, despite everything. Ultimately, this is an epic about failure, and how failure can eventually lead us to a victory more glorious than we could ever imagine. If I can ask anything from you, it's your time. Because in order to paint a complete picture of what this game is and what it means to the few people who care about it, it's going to take a lot of it, and I hope you stick around to the very end. Huge thank you to the patrons of the Jawcoin tier and above. You're the ones keeping this channel alive. Listen to my story. This may be our last chance. The standard blueprint of gaming consoles has been long established for 20 years now. You have your choice of Nintendo console, PlayStation, Xbox, or PC, but things weren't always so rigid back then. In order to have such an oligopoly, you need to build that empire on the bones of those who failed. So let's rewind the clock back to the early 1990s. Nintendo and Sega, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System versus the Sega Genesis. It's the most famous example of video game manufacturers being hyper-aggressive with each other in order to come out as top dog in the market. We've all at least heard of the Bit Wars, or the Console Wars, or some other de facto term, with certain disgraced creators referring to it as their own personal Vietnam in their memoirs. I think that's what it actually says. I have this book. Several figures and franchises rose and fell within this time frame of the late 1980s to early 90s, but among them was a dark horse, someone whose name is scarcely uttered today, but whose influence has irreparably changed the landscape of the medium: Trip Hawkins. The term genius is thrown around a lot, but Hawkins was ostensibly so. A Harvard graduate and longtime fan of tabletop American football games, Hawkins left an immensely successful career at Apple Computers to found the video game developer company Electronic Arts, better known as EA. EA is known for their sports games and heartless studio acquisitions and closures today, but they started out with humble Apple II and ZX Spectrum games inspired by the tabletop experiences Tripp loved so much. It wasn't until the late 80s when Hawkins had his most ambitious idea yet, a game that would simulate the most true-to-life football experience to date. Have you ever wondered why the John Madden NFL games are called Madden? That's because Hawkins believes so strongly in his project and John Madden's endorsement that he refused to let it die.
We had such an ambitious undertaking. It took 4 years to make the game.
It was almost killed a number of times.
And it became known in the company as Tripp's Folly. Everyone in the company thought we should just give up and forget the whole thing. And I was just very determined to make it work.
Hawkins rallied his team by comparing the situation to former American President Herbert Hoover with prosperity around the corner, to quote Hawkins himself, which turned out to be his master stroke, because long after John Madden's death in 2021, Madden NFL is still a worldwide success. If this shows anything, it's that Tripp Hawkins was an exceptionally driven individual, never giving up on a project until the bitter end, and he was ambitious, perhaps to a fault. EA was primarily a computer software company at the time, but joined the console wars on the side of Sega, who had the superior processors needed to run the high-octane sports titles Hawkins had planned, and it helped they didn't have to pay the exorbitant licensing fees Nintendo had. Hawkins met with Sega executives to negotiate licensing fees and partnerships, but during one of these meetings in either 1989 or 1990, Hawkins revealed his underhand, full of subterfuge and schemes. He had hired a team in the background to secretly reverse engineer Sega Genesis systems to figure out how to create unlicensed games in a pseudo 3D effect for their Madden titles before they had ever agreed to any licensing. According to ESPN, he revealed his entire reverse engineering scheme to Sega in full, but was still willing to become a legitimate partner to Sega, so long as his cartridge production rates were $2 per game, a gigantic cut from the normal $8 to $10. The plan was outrageous, with Hawkins himself even acknowledging that Sega could have easily silenced him with a lawsuit, but said his years of previous successes would hire immaculate lawyers, and that his research under the Genesis could easily be sold to another company. He weaponized the war between Sega and Nintendo to gain an absurd advantage. During the Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago, a convention meant to showcase the latest and greatest in tech, Tripp Hawkins received a call and was now an official partner with Sega, with an incredibly reduced production rate. This made EA famously wealthy, and one would expect the now deviously rewarded Hawkins to settle down with his cushy Madden job forever, but within a single year, he wasn't satisfied. He stepped down as CEO of EA in 1991, not to latch on to a competitor in the console war, but to join it outright. He looked at the pixel graphics of the Genesis and Super Nintendo and thought, hold my rollin' rock. He was fueled by hot-blooded ambition and moxie, but unbeknownst to him, this would ultimately be Tripp's Folly. The 3DO company was shortly established in September of '91. 3DO stood for three-dimensional optics, which was a clear enough indicator of what kind of software they would be peddling. The 3DO was a CD-based console, which was a technical curiosity at the time. The Sega CD and even the Philips CDI existed prior, but they weren't very successful ventures because of how expensive they were to develop for, and because 99% of the games at the time were total ass. Typically, the physical hardware for a video game console would be sold at a loss, since it was expensive to manufacture, and the companies would recoup these losses by charging developers costs per cart or CD, as well as taking percentages of said sale of software. The 3DO flipped this model on its head. They lacked the resources and funds outright to develop the hardware, so they gave their schematics to various Japanese and Korean companies to develop their own versions of the consoles with some slight variations between models. These companies were big players like Panasonic, Gold Star, now known as LG, Samsung, and most important for this video, Sanyo Electronics. Hawkins was able to convince these manufacturers to support his console because he offered $3 per CD for manufacturing rates, something he learned to leverage with Sega. The sales pitch of "we're a lot cheaper than the competition" sounds silly, but clearly these companies were on board and decided to indeed create these consoles. The 3DO was creating an immense amount of buzz during its showcase, So much so that Trip Hawkins was able to be the lead keynote speaker at the following Consumer Electronics Show in '93, beating Bill Gates for the position. To many folks, there was a third figure entering the console wars, this bold American virtuoso with a crazy plan that just might work. The advertisements were suitably edgy, dunking on Nintendo and Sega both as children's toys, while the 3DO was going to be the next true step up for those so-called primitive 16-bit machines with its 32-bit graphics. They boasted their Cell engine, which was able to manipulate sprites with lossless squashing and stretching, which looked very impressive for the time. They put an acronym spelling out REAL right on the console. They knew how swag this thing looked. And correct me if I'm mistaken, but during its reveal and eventual release in 1993, it was the most powerful video game console of all time. But there was still one big concern with this financially. Where exactly would the gross profits from the company come from? Who was going to float the cost of developing the hardware? The consumer, of course. The 3DO launched on October 4th for a jaw-dropping, heart-stopping $699 in 1993, which is nearly $1,500 American today, which to say the least was astronomically more expensive than the competition. But if the games were just so advanced, so powerful, people would surely just suck it up and buy the thing anyways, right?
Take your damn clothes off!
Most of the 3DO's output was FMV games, which were instantly dated upon release, or generally just looked really underwhelming and not exciting to a casual audience, or dedicated audience, or anyone. There were eventually some interesting ports for PC games like Alone in the Dark and Myst, but there was nothing that could ever compete with Super Mario or Sonic the Hedgehog. Gex tried. Believe me, he tried.
I'm thinking I'm back.
Some of these games did indeed look impressive, with some of them trying to be real 3D experiences, but most developers on board with the console just couldn't hack it, and their games fell into almost total obscurity. The console manufacturers took on the game publishing role, which was a venture they often leave out of their memoirs and Wikipedia pages. It's not easy to explain that Panasonic published a game called Balls back in the day, but it really happened. So combine an astronomical price point with a library that can soundly be described as almost entirely ass, and you had a recipe for a near total failure. I am not a 90s kid. I was born in 2001, but I had a fairly 90s childhood because most toys and entertainment I had was stuff bought in the 90s when my parents were younger. I grew up on the Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, and I knew people who had Sega Genesises. I've never met anybody who's ever owned a 3DO growing up. Guess those baby toys were just more fun than something real. There are far more rise and fall of the 3DO videos on YouTube to gorge yourself on, so I won't bore you with any more details past the fact the original PlayStation launched a year after and promptly stole 3DO's initial reputation as the third party that would break the Nintendo-Sega stalemate.
$299. There's a lot of confidence that investors in Wall Street have about multimedia generally and about 3DO specifically.
3DO quickly stopped producing the console in late 1996 and became a game publisher, but soon flunked out of that too. Trip Hawkins took a backseat role in the video game industry and quietly exited the public eye. Throughout the laughably short lifespan of the console, there were a few starry-eyed companies and individuals who managed to make a name for themselves. The incredibly niche and experimental horror game D was a surprising success, which allowed its developer, Kenji Ito, to create multiple games and even start a family off the back of its profits. Toys for Bob, most famous for developing the Nintendo versions of the Skylanders games and eventually working on Crash Bandicoot and Spyro before being thrown in the Call of Duty meat grinder, got their foot in the door with 3DO games like Star Commander and The Horde. Most good or even infamous titles have escaped the abandonware fate by means of ports, either onto the PlayStation or PC or a shoddy remaster decades later. But amongst all of the hardware manufacturers, Sanyo was perhaps the most enthusiastic. The grand total list of developed 3DO games is embarrassingly short in general, but Sanyo published about 5 games for the console, which were mostly humble puzzle and sports games, but there was one that stood out from the rest. One title that sought to bring sweeping change to the role-playing genre, and it was dubbed Dragon Tycoon Edge. The RPG was a genre that went through drastic changes in appearance and structure throughout the video game industry, and what an RPG looks like to you might depend on when and where you were born. America was largely the birthplace of computer role-playing games, so the average Joe would be used to first-person dungeon crawlers like Wizardry, or perhaps tile-based Ultima games. In Japan, dungeon crawlers definitely were a thing, but there were several series that took strides in originality. Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy were turn-based and featured character sprites present at all times. The battle systems were becoming more complex and characters were beginning to have distinct appearances and personalities, which was relatively new at the time. Both franchises had the occasional localized entry in America that became fairly popular, but it struggled to make a big splash out of the Asian market. Final Fantasy Mystic Quest was a questionable attempt at capturing the American market, and most people were enraptured by releases like Ultima Underworld instead. The genre was taking its first baby steps into the 3D realm. It had a lot of growing pains. A scrappy little studio called Sala International was prepared to be the one to carry the genre into new heights, to usher the next generation of RPGs. Who is Sala International? Great question. Look them up. You will hardly find any information about them. They're like a ghost shell company. I was eventually able to find out that Sala was a video editing company based in Tokyo that would edit commercials and occasional documentaries for different film companies. I tried to look for commercials they specifically worked on, but I believe that much of this info predates common internet archival practices. This makes Sanyo Electronics' partnership with Sala to create video games even more curious. Looking up some of the developers for this game, their trail in the industry goes cold from the 90s onward, with most of them having never worked on anything else, or tinkering with one or two projects for the Sega Saturn a couple years later. I have to assume most of these people have no experience in the video game industry, but were now tasked with creating a video game with highly experimental technology. Besides the voice actors, the only person who stuck around in the industry was Matsuo Matsuzawa, who was attached to the Ride and Shmup series. All other trails lead to dead ends, except one. A CG artist named Seino Satoru Silvio, a Brazilian gentleman briefly working in the games industry around the mid to late 90s. He left a YouTube comment in English under one of the only gameplay videos of Tycoon Edge on YouTube, so I contacted him, and he provided some important context and information. According to him, the development was extremely stressful for various reasons, one being the shockingly little amount of time to actually develop the game. The game was released in February of 1995, but development began in March of 1994. 10 months to develop the next step of RPGs just sounds like a bad idea, but working with a 3DO was not the easiest task in the world to begin with. The 3DO's technology was not well understood, especially for the high amount of 3D graphics the game was intending to use. They were using Lightwave 3D to make the models, which is a program most famous for being the go-to when your startup LLC needs a floating 3D logo. Given how little time Sala had to make this game, and how this was their first attempt at making a video game, things were rocky right from the start and scarcely improved. Little is known about any of the development personalities, but Silvio recounts how especially stressful the environment was. He is of half Brazilian, half Japanese descent, and was a self-taught 3D artist, so there were some cultural differences between work environments and hierarchies that he took umbrage with. There was a particular moment he spoke of where Kazumi Tokunaga, the project lead, accidentally deleted a model from the database and demanded that Silvio simply make it again from scratch. Despite it all, Silvio said the team felt a consistent sense of achievement and wonder throughout the harsh development cycle, taking great pride in their work and feeling like it could make a serious impact on the face of gaming. Scans and screenshots of this project appeared in leaflets in the back of magazines, boasting all sorts of features like epic character animation and dynamic story unlike anything in the industry, a fully voice-acted cast, all things mostly alien to the genre at the time. 10 scenarios were promised, over 80 characters included, with some kind of time limit being advertised. Sala International and Sanyo were pulling up all the stops. They sought out to fundamentally alter the RPG genre for good. There were printed scans of this yellow robot-like character fighting in some colorful backgrounds, which genuinely did look impressive for the '94 publication. It's easy to mock the appearance now, but comparing it to the early previews and screenshots of the PlayStation, there was a pretty substantial difference in ability. Curiously, there was no attempt at the start to translate this game into other languages, but surely that would come from the other successes this project would have later on. Soon, the fabled release date of this game, February 24th, 1995, came and went. Dragon Tycoon Edge did not seem to grab many headlines after its marketing campaign, and rapidly became a product people question is even real because of its obscurity, which is a clear sign as any that the game did not do well, or at least didn't catch on. I know the game exists because I found a secondhand copy, but try looking this game up. You will only find the scantest of Japanese Let's Plays with under 100 views to their name. What happened? For a title claiming to be the next step in the genre, how did it just slip under the radar like this? I only found out about this game from a friend, and the world was exposed to it at large from a Magellar video. I wanted to ask, where did you find out about it? Did you see a video or you were scrolling on some list of 3DO games and you just went like, the hell is that?
There's a lot of like weird like foreign language websites that I found that do a pretty meticulous job of cataloging even the most obscure things. Dragon Tycoon Edge had like a Moby Games page but with like no info on it.
Something about the game looked and sounded, it looked fake, inauthentic. I refused to believe it was real even though I held a copy in my hands. I scoured the internet unlike anything I've ever done, frantically consuming all that I could. It was then I had to swallow my pride and do the second most embarrassing thing in this video. I Google translated comments to Japanese and posted them below various gameplay videos, desperate to have anyone answer my pleas, to gain just a crumb of knowledge on such an enigmatic title. All hope seemed lost until... Yes, I know a lot about this game, and I can remember the details still now because I played this in my adolescence, but the development company was nameless, so I have very little information about that. Maybe that has gone out of business now. However, I can talk about this game so much. Could you tell me what you want to know? And I have been studying English now, and I don't use any translators for my practice, so English is strange in place, but please forgive me. My reply underneath a 6-year-old comment was seen, and the OP did not disappoint. I had found someone who, for one, knew about the game, and also spoke English. We quickly made contact on Twitter/X. This is Yu. Yu is a game designer currently working at Konami, though he previously worked at other companies prior. It's only because of Yu that this video was able to be made. He provided me with several custom created graphs and transcripts of the game translated for me, which means I was able to gain a general understanding of this game's flow and story, all because he was familiar with the game. Yu speaks some English, but he admits he isn't perfect with the translations. Whenever the text and my commentary don't line up, that's because I'm reading between the lines and fixing up some grammar and paraphrasing. But his English is absolutely at least halfway decent. I highly recommend you watch all the way through to the final chapter, because more details about Yu will be revealed. With this, I am able to somewhat translate what's going on here, which is not something any other English speaker seems to have done publicly, at least for now, so leave a like for that. I don't own a Japanese 3DO, nor the cables or capture card devices needed to natively run the game, so I had to do the most embarrassing thing in this video, use RetroArch. 3DO emulation is horribly underdocumented and hardly achievable, but there is a RetroArch core for it. It's hardly perfect, but I got it running well enough, at least with only minor issues. I want you to very quickly imagine everything you don't like in bad video games. Really think about it. Inconsistent difficulty, poor navigation, everything looks bad, terrible controls, anything you could possibly think of as just an awful, awful flaw. I want you to take that mental image and now quadruple it. And you still haven't seen the depths of depravity Dragon Tycoon Edge has in store for us. For every blade of grass and every droplet of water that exists on this planet, it matches a flaw, or blemish, or general unfortunate happenstance of this game. And I'm only slightly exaggerating. If you look at the credits on the manual, you can see someone especially interesting is thanked. God. To be exact, God, who makes the impossible possible. Thanking God for making something otherwise incomprehensible now possible is something you should interpret to be a frightening premonition of what's to come. Want to see how this game starts? Okay, it doesn't start like that. Our story takes place on a star at the edge of the universe called Edge. hence the name. Edge has been conquered by something called the Fog Empire, ruled by the artificial god named Outneon, though he's called a holy weapon on the back of the game's box. Outneon's 3 executives, one of which is called the Evil Pope, yes, that's actually what it's called, are driving Edge to total collapse and ruin, causing its already maligned and abused inhabitants to lash out and become violent and afraid. This guy here is named Algius, some kind of rogue priest at the end of his life, praying to a figure called the Goddess to give birth to a prophesized hero, the only one capable of saving Edge. With Algius's dying breath, our player character, Alm, is born. With a prophecy at her side and a vague goal at hand, Alm sets to save Edge, and here's what it looks like. Then you get hit by the meteor and game over instantly. As someone who was once in the position of being introduced to this game for the first time, I can tell there are at least one of a couple different immediate thoughts you're thinking. Is this real? Why does it look so uncanny? What? Huh? Dragon Tycoon Edge's unique look is its biggest draw, which is as plain as day. However pitifully few videos of this game exist on the internet, nearly every comment is a differently worded accusation of this game being fake, and it's entirely forgivable. 1990s 3D graphics are definitely not what they are now. They don't resemble anything human by our standards today, but anyone who grew up around the time period can still note how impressive some of these games and films were with this emerging technology. There was something of a soft competition for many PlayStation games back in the day to look as impressive and true to life as possible, with rapid expansions and the technological ability to render a human model routinely shocking consumers. What sets Dragon Tycoon Edge apart is that there is no attempt to make humans look real, but rather bring this strange alien world to life. Alm is described as a demi-human, and his hairless, almost entirely featureless body does quite a bit to sell his only partial human nature, even if he has a pair of icy A10s. There are various environments you discover throughout Edge, but none of them ever quite look right. The volcanoes and foggy mountain bridges seem almost familiar, but that alien-like quality glazes over them to nestle them promptly in the uncanny valley. 3DO titles tend to settle into this unintentional aesthetic, partially because the 3D technology was so new for the time, and the console was notoriously difficult to develop for. But most people can easily distinguish what is most likely a PlayStation game and what is a 3DO game if you put them side by side for a couple different reasons. The 3DO has this kind of unique outsider artist vibe that the PlayStation largely skirted, at least in my eyes. Basically anyone with a company could develop a 3DO game, which beats the already semi-experimental nature of PlayStation publishing at the time. Even in this era of experimentation and forthcomings, PlayStation was just more of a straight-laced and professional by comparison, while the 3DO company was a nightmare top to bottom. Even the weirdest Net Eurose projects just pale in comparison to whatever happened there. We're currently trotting around in the game's first and longest scenario, White Lizard Island, an island sailing around space littered with these murky blue asteroids in a purple and pink landscape, surrounded by dreary stars on a void black background. There are just aspects of design and interactions that betray the fact that this was Sala International's first game. But even so, I have never seen another game where our player character transcends the game and exists within this black void of our own UI. Of course, Dragon Tycoon Edge is an RPG, but what kind? The wizardry DNA runs deep, because this is a dungeon crawler, but not one you've ever experienced before. Most dungeon crawlers usually have you move one space on a grid, so you keep tapping in one direction to traverse whatever castle underbelly you're currently exploring. DTE kind of operates on rails. You are launched forward with every tap of the upper analog button, with the camera stuck on your ass the entire way. The distances you travel are entirely arbitrary depending on the area. Sometimes you slowly trudge through a hallway, and sometimes you travel miles of distance in a single button. I found it disorienting and confusing because you can only move forward and change directions to left and right. There is no button to step backwards or flip 180 degrees to reorient yourself. If you cannot enter an area, Alm will verbally say, which kind of translates to needing to stop something, that something being your ability to walk forward. You have to wait for this audio file to stop before you can move again. There's essentially no ability to tell if a specific path will take you to a flat-out dead end or somewhere you need to be without suddenly finding you can't go there, which will result in Alm violently jerking to the left or right to walk another way. Because of this movement system, 99% of environments are wide open with several different main directions to travel, with occasional forks in the road. The only way I can remotely describe how this feels to play is like going outside, but only being able to move like a bishop chess piece. Some landscapes that don't look traversable are, and areas that look totally traversable aren't. The only way to find out is to bump into every conceivable thing you see, which wastes a tremendous amount of your already squandered time if you decided to play this. I still don't understand why our character exists outside the boundaries of the game, but it's a very interesting choice to have a first-person dungeon crawler conveniently feature a view of your main character's ass at all times. Is it even first-person at that point? I guess it's like third-person, but it navigates first-person? It's very strange. And if you're wondering why all of these clips have a different character model, hoo boy. This is not a traditional RPG in most regards. There is an experience system, you gain levels, but your health and magic points are entirely determined by the game's alien possession system. Every time you win an encounter, you possess an alien and take over their body, literally becoming them and gaining their stats. It's an incredibly proprietary and unusual idea that's quite different from typical Blue Mage shenanigans, but the main gist of it is that you not only take their HP and MP counts, but also their unique spells. Your battle system involves a standard attack, which is so ass you should never use it, your spells, items, and fleeing. You start off with a basic fireball spell that's your only real way of winning the beginning fight against whatever that is. But you gain more powerful attacking spells, some healing spells, 1 or 2 status affliction spells. It seems very gimmicky, but it is a kind of functional system. But you don't know half of it. The possession system is this game's yin and yang, its greatest strength, and its biggest flaw. There is no possession command or option. It happens almost every single fight afterwards in this entire game, with no known way to cancel it after defeating a foe. And since each alien has its own set of stats, you can very easily defeat a powerful alien with a huge HP bar, then run into the weakest alien in the game and be forced to transform into it. I can almost hear you cooking up some nightmare scenarios of being transformed into a weak alien just a few steps away from a boss encounter, and I match that fantasy with the claim that nearly the entire game is set up that way. But these encounters become so much more insidious when you realize that there aren't any intended random encounters. Each spot on the map hosts a specific alien, but you will not find out until it just pops up and attacks you. So they intended to have 0 random encounters since each alien is at a specific location, but they just reinvented random encounters. Fleeing from an enemy just sends you back a couple spaces, so if there's a foe blocking your path you need to cross, you have to fight it at some point. You retain their powerful spells, but that won't do you any good when you simply don't have the MP count to attack effectively. For this reason, fights are either an instant win or an instant lose depending on the matchup. Even if you know where a boss is and grab the best possible body, there will almost always be something put directly in front of it just to troll you and completely shatter your game plan. And get this, enemies don't respawn at all. If you just started this game and you made your way up to gradually clear the stronger foes on the map, you're forced to become a weak alien in front of the boss. You will not win against the boss and you simply must restart to your last save point. It's not that soft locking yourself is a possibility, it's how you learn to play the game. From the moment you're given control, one of these paths down the platform leads to an instant game over, which is the game's way of telling you not to go to that area. There are occasional warnings from this recurring crag lizard character telling you this, but just as often you find out you can't go somewhere by dying instantly. RPGs live and die by characters. Even the old school ones where you had to manually make them yourselves were incredibly careful to give players specific roles in combat based on familiar archetypes or whatever. But whatever sense of comfort or familiarity that could possibly be present in understanding how a character plays is totally ripped away from you, making Edge feel that much more mysterious and lonely to navigate. Not knowing where enemies could be on the map and how differently they could play mostly determined by their specific HP and MP pools. The base attack being so worthless is a huge sore spot, because a simple dynamic change that could have been implemented is giving each alien a more unique stat distribution to make physical attackers and magical attackers a more distinct split. No matter which way you look at it, it is a tremendously flawed system that serves to get the player into trouble and unintentionally punishes exploration. In order to play the game effectively, you need to have a lot of time to burn, or have a guide. I looked everywhere for some fabled Dragon Tycoon Edge strategy guide, booklet, or online walkthrough, but neither seemed to exist, which meant I had to play this game completely blind. It was not a fun time. I don't even think we have a speed stat. You always go first in battles, but that somehow still doesn't help us win fights. Under the hood, there do seem to be enemy classifications, like these monk aliens, because there's this character here who will fight you unless you have a monk alien possessed that very moment. Of course, you just have to guess these classes. They're not displayed anywhere, nor is the player verbally told, as far as I know. The only way to learn how to play is through excruciating trial and error, unlike anything I've ever seen. I genuinely thought it was a cruel one-time joke at the start, but no, the whole game operates like this, which means you will be abusing the save function. Well, in theory at least. Of course, none of these characters spawn in normal places. Half the time you need to face a complete dead end to get them to spawn, which is especially vicious if they have a key item you need. Who else is just gonna face the wall and hope a guy materializes in front of you to get what you need? This only gets worse as you go on too. Something I do feel the need to praise is how varied each foe is. Each one looks completely unique and has very smooth and detailed animation for their attacks. Compare this to Final Fantasy VII, which was released 2 years after this game. Each one has a unique walk cycle, and there are occasionally some very cool character designs. Every single character has at least some voice acting as well. Many of these actors are still in the industry today, and the sound quality is actually not too bad. This level of clarity was uncommon for the decade, but it was genuinely impressive. It does come with the downside of most character dialogue being voice only with no transcript, which made translation a much bigger pain in the ass. Do you want to hear a fact that will make you cry, break down, and lose all hope? DTE requires these purple crystals to save your game, and they are a limited resource. Doesn't seem like an absurd idea. Other games have done this, but there are less than 30 crystals throughout the entire length of the game. I'm sorry, less than 30 opportunities to save during a multi-hour JRPG that is incredibly easy to softlock yourself in? That is nothing short of a total nightmare scenario. Rock bottom game design. I can't tell you how many times I had to completely reset my game from scratch just because I wasn't able to play this game perfectly and chart out the correct course in reaching specific encounters. It goes beyond just taking out threats you know where to find, but it's the constant backtracking and looping around. Just because you made sure to leave a moderately powerful alien alone just to fight a specific encounter later on doesn't mean you'll like it or have fun doing so. It totally fails to deliver any promise of fun or satisfaction. It's just miserably droll and agonizing to even behold for a moment. And there's so little room to save progress. You have to play this stupid island over and over and over. Imagine having to do all this planning, all this strategy through trial and error, through figuring out which aliens to possess and when, which spells to focus on, all of these incredible spinning plates at once, and you've hypothetically exhausted all your save crystals because you're so nervous you just keep saving immediately, only to activate some invisible trigger that lets you into a new area of the game where the foe blocking it will automatically take you down because your current alien is worthless and you have no saving options. Which means, go right back to a previous save point, or the beginning, buddy. This is DTE's unforgivable sin, something that will force you to keep the game console on overnight during a Saturday night because the game was just too confusing for your young mind. I'm hesitant to solely blame the short development time, because if you can put 30 crystals in the game, why not just multiply the number? And if your inventory can only hold so many items, just increase it. Or better yet, allow these crystals to stack. It's a completely baffling issue that seems like an incredibly easy fix in several different ways, but I think we're staring at the real reason why the game is set up this way in the face. It was deliberate. Sala International wanted the players to struggle, so the saves were hard capped at 30. Crystals are placed throughout the game in order to not leave you totally screwed for a few key intervals, but of course they aren't placed ideally. The end game has several crystals to make playing it fairly comfortable, but the very beginning, where players are required to cut their teeth and learn how to play this brutal game, has very few of them. This backwards mentality of the end game being rewarding and easy at the start being exceptionally challenging will be a repeated pattern later on. However, since I'm emulating this, I can abuse save states like my children, which I did as much as I could. There are only 9 save state slots, so it's hardly a cakewalk. But don't worry, the emulator punished me for trying to have a life outside of playing this game. The audio issues were kind of a nightmare. It played the tracks just fine, but it was a coin toss where it would just erupt this corrupted static shriek inhumanly loud into my ears with no warning and lasted several seconds. Take a listen. I had to endure this for my entire playtime. There was no fixing this error. So imagine having to play this game in this horrible way and then get jump scared randomly with the sounds of the lawnmower man getting degloved. There are the occasional battles that have to be won with outright luck, however. Sometimes you can only win fights if the enemy just chooses not to use their most powerful moves. And I want you to guess which moves are more powerful: the bombastic magical attacks, or getting roundhouse kicked in the head. For some reason, most of your foes' physical attacks are their strongest ones, with their magical ones being far weaker, the complete inverse of you. I have no idea if there's some hidden stats underneath that aren't privy to the player, but good grief, this game just doesn't end with its ridiculous setup. The magic spells have no attributes or elements or any strategies to employ other than use the highest damaging ones to end the fight as quickly as possible. That's it. There is a later healing spell, but it restores such a pitiful amount of health in battle. It's only really useful in the overworld. There's also a spell to restore MP, but it's so horribly botched. Most RPGs have spells like these that cost a measly 1 or 2 MP in order to restore your MP, like it's supposed to. DTE makes that cost far higher, which means you'll be gaining a maximum of 1 extra magical attack every time you restore it, which is already kind of a turn wasted because you need to spend MP to get MP, which doesn't guarantee you can use a spell that will do anything. What are these Argentinian bank exchange rates for MP? Are you kidding me? The song you're hearing, the world's most generic battle music of all time, that's the only battle song. There's no alternate themes, not even for the final bosses. Every time you hear a battle, you just hear dun 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 dun. It has a fade out in the audio file. It doesn't even loop seamlessly. It just stops and starts again. Almost nothing about this battle system works, let alone feels fun. It's like building a house of cards on top of a house of cards, and if some random electron from the blackest depths of space decides to rush in and shift the weight 1 iota and causes the homes to collapse, you have to pay the insurance as if they were real properties. No matter which way you slice this horrifyingly designed cake, you're getting a big slice of misery and pain with every bite. You don't have to be a fan of any RPG to realize something is wrong here. The core, fundamental basics of a video game are either thrown out in the window or are so woefully unbalanced that it makes even the most battle-hardened fan cry. It's almost hard to convey just how much time I spent on Scenario 1 figuring out how this game works. I've wasted untold hours, days trying to figure this out. Even with you in my corner recollecting what he remembers from playing the game, even with the obvious language barrier, it's still remarkably tedious. However, there is a benefit or two to this whole alien possession thing. I really want to establish that he is stealing these bodies, because this is what happens every time you win a fight. This decadently atmospheric and spacey audio file is called memory, because these screens here are supposed to be the real memories of each individual alien you possess. This orb is your soul ejecting the other soul unto the afterlife, and you get a view, a snapshot of their lives each time you win. You never know what you're gonna get. Some memories are of nearby locations that contain some kind of special item you need to progress, or a memory of a low-level alien feeling anxious that Edge is so biblically doomed that end is quite literally spelled out in the stars. It's a remarkably unique and almost frightening system of progression with some pretty stark implications. Since enemies don't respawn, we really do just completely take over these creatures' bodies. There are several encounters that strongly imply that most characters don't even know who Ulm is or why their subordinates or friends are suddenly hostile after possession, and they die thinking they were just turned on in a moment's notice. Everything from male, female, robots, and even child aliens are essentially slaughtered by Ulm, and presumably their corpses are left to rot after he hops from body to body. Does that really sound like something a righteous hero does? Stealing the identities of these beings for his own purposes? These little snapshots of areas are meant to push you in the right direction, are implicitly the last sights each creature has seen before you kill them. There's even a point in the game where one of these aliens' last thoughts is about being the last of their race before we kill them. Some of these creatures are just mindless alien bugs or whatever, but a lot of them have individual names and personalities, especially the bosses. They're trying to kill you first, so I can't imagine many juries would convict Ulm of manslaughter, but even at the conceptual level, it is a very disturbing idea that our hero erases these people's minds from their bodies and lives within their skin, all while almost nobody can tell the difference. I don't know how much of this was intended to come off as horrifying, but it absolutely does. It adds such a gross, sinister twist to this already oddball battle system that often got under my skin. There's no ruminations on sending these aliens to the afterlife. Ulm is a man of few words, so that void left by our actions hung over my head throughout this exhausting playthrough. Perhaps motivated by the desire to showcase their advanced 3D graphics, they decided to not give Ulm a consistent appearance, which is extremely bold for the genre. I briefly thought about that one character in Chrono Cross who had a similar feature, but a more apt comparison would be the Relics series. The gist of it is that you're a spirit who possesses the bodies of enemies and corpses strewn around ancient ruins of a war between heaven and hell, with you being tasked to figure out the greater story based on context clues. The first Relics game was released for the mid-80s for PCs, so I wouldn't be surprised if at least one person played Relics back in the day for inspiration. I'd love to do a video on the Relics series, but it's almost entirely in Japanese, so no dice. There's no party of characters or a marketable mascot creature, nothing like that. How much of that decision was intentionally a bold storytelling choice, and how much was because they either had no time to develop anything, or they just wanted their fancy models to be showcased is debatable, but it really does recontextualize our journey. The demigod Ulm possesses whatever living creature he needs in order to stop the destruction of the Fog Empire is perpetrating, which is so horrible that the stars are quite literally aligning to signify it. Of course, since this is Dragon Tycoon Edge, there's a horribly flawed side to the memory system too. Once the memories pop up, they vanish, and there is no option to ever see them again. Some of these clues you need to progress are only shown in one memory, so if you left to use the washroom or weren't paying attention for 5 seconds, you will have no clue at how to progress. There's no menu option to view each captured memory again. The clues are also pretty inconsistent. Some of them give you appropriately vague hints on where to go, while others will directly spell it out for you. How did this alien have a memory of our personal inventory? I had to take screenshots of every memory to tell what was going on, which led me to pick up a few items, like a key and some orbs and spheres and rings or whatever. This game is very item heavy. You need to find a thing to do another thing, and sometimes you get items that are pretty worthless. Algius's ghost returns for one scene to give us some tips and his rod, which deals so little damage it honestly makes me wonder why he even gave it to us. I was beginning to understand our actual goal here. We need to reach something called the Shining Tower, which involves killing this thing here to get their soul, which will allow us entry. We learn that the monks I previously mentioned have taken over White Lizard Island, declaring it as a separate state to the Fog Empire as they try to split it off from the greater continent. You get an item that allows you to become one of these monks instantly, which actually temporarily solves the problem being forced to transform into weak aliens. It's not strong enough to take on the bosses, but it was clearly intended to not make yourself a target to the monk guarding the chasm here, and if you get screwed over, you have a fighting chance for like a medium-sized alien. So they deliberately made items that let you transform into specific beings whenever you want, but they didn't want you to use them outside of like really specific circumstances. This item vanished from my inventory pretty shortly after I left the area, and I have no idea if it's because it's programmed to do that or if I used it too many times. I don't know, man. I'm totally not mad they didn't just make more dynamic aliens act as character classes you can swap between to make a Ben 10 style game, and instead actively chose this catastrophe of a system. The Shining Tower is the only way to get to the continent, and it's guarded by two especially powerful figures. The first one can only be fought after obtaining a key and finding him in a really obscure spot, and the second is standing right in front of the entrance. The first guy has a specific spell involving 3 balls of light, and as soon as you win this fight, you have just won the game, almost entirely shattering the game's difficulty over your knee. This spell does an astronomical amount of damage and hardly costs any MP, making it the primary spell I used until the literal final boss of the game. Once you have this spell, the other guardian dies so fast it hardly feels like a fight. What on earth were they thinking? The spell is so good that I actively used it over other attacking moves I got later on, which did more damage but wasted more MP, which is an incredibly important resource to save, unless you feel like resetting a whole route's worth of progress over it. The entire shtick of this game's difficulty is planning which bodies to use, but since the spell is so strong, you can take drastically shorter routes to make the game much easier by having aliens with smaller MP pools. There's no way this was intentional, right? I am accusing Sala of making a hilarious developer oversight here. And you know what's crazy? The developer oversights are the things that make this game kind of fun, or at least tolerable, and the intentionally included things are almost universally painful. Case in point, if you don't finish all your tasks on White Lizard Island fast enough, the entire island just explodes. The Cosmos weren't kidding when they said the end was near. It's right around the corner. Hope you didn't unknowingly save mere moments before the implosion just to force you to reload a different save. If you made one, that is. Why did Sala make the first stage of the game so hard? This is scenario 1 out of 10, and there were so few ways to save in an area that demands perfection from the player. You have to have an almost perfect route planned and learned from repetition, have to use specific spells, and do all of that within a time limit. The time limit is a feature they were so proud of, they advertised for it on the box. Come on, man, this is cruel and unusual. I'm half expecting my save data to just corrupt as another FU from Sala at this point. I don't think I've ever seen a video game be more unfriendly and vicious to the player at the start than this. I'm scared one of these guys is gonna hop through my monitor and rob me or something. To be fair, I'm being overdramatic about the time limit. It's especially generous, and I had to actively wait and do nothing just to get footage of it happening. Leave a like for that, by the way. But I'm still in shock that not only are you given so little opportunities to save, it's all under a time limit. Is there also a results screen that judges you how well you've played and calls you an idiot for not doing it fast enough? There's a section in this tower where I think we plant a bomb for some reason, but I can certainly tell you that I don't appreciate the timer going off while we're in the menus and in combat. Kind of funny that we get a permanent new addition to our UI for a feature that is used twice in the entire game though. Shout out to fighting this crab while the timer is active, then finding out how embarrassingly small its magic pool is, then having to fight another boss right after it with basically no other way to turn into an alternate alien. Great. Norm, the gatekeeper, there'll be a lot of weird English names later on, is the only thing that stands between White Lizard Island and the continent proper, where our next task is to find 5 souls to take on the Empire. Time, water, wind, fire, and light. We have a time soul, but not an earth soul? Okay. When you leave the island, the general structure of progression changes completely. We enter a town called Causeville, yes, this is supposed to be a town, which acts as a central hub. There are various exits throughout that lead to different paths to obtain most of these 5 souls we need in any order we want. I'm not kidding, Dragon Tycoon Edge has suddenly become open world to a limited degree. The water soul and light soul you can't obtain till later, but you can tackle the time, wind, and fire soul in any order. This completely floored me when I got here. Going from an incredibly strict linear path to an open world adventure is a very odd decision. Even more so when you realize that once you leave the island, the hardest part of the game is just over. These routes are far more lax in comparison. It's not like other games haven't operated like this, but was anyone actually expecting this game to follow suit? There are still many challenges to be had, but nothing even remotely compares to the agony of the first starting hours of our adventure. Once you've hit Causeville, for the love of God, use a save crystal. You've earned it. When you find this cave and minecart, you can find this artist character who will outright give you an inventory item that lets you teleport back to this house in Causeville no matter where you are. All these paintings on the wall represent an area you can fast travel back to once you've reached them. I can't believe my eyes. Actual quality of life features. I was so prepared to walk everywhere that seeing this room almost made me collapse and cry. First of all, how did Dragon Tycoon Edge do the whole teleporting painting thing a whole year before Mario 64? Secondly, I hope the oceanic level of quality differences between being on White Lizard and leaving it should highlight the hilariously short amount of time the team had to work on this entire game. White Lizard's problems run deep in its veins, so I think in order to not have a 99% of players quit before they leave problem, they should have just I don't know, man. The whole thing is rotten. I think I deserve a purple heart for escaping this purple island. This digital all quiet on the western front. I feel like I've escaped from a jigsaw trap. You have to give that artist guy one of your magic spells in order to get that teleporting item. And I have no idea if you can actually choose which spell to give. My starting fireball attack just kind of vanished, but I got it back instantly after transforming into another alien who had it on him. The game went from like a 1 out of 10 to a 4 out of 10 instantly. Still in the red, but it doesn't actively make me wish I died from crib death at 1 year old. Being able to access so many different paths also does a tremendous amount to make finding the right aliens a lot more reasonable. You actually have more than one enemy choice to tackle the bosses, and since you have one of the most powerful spells in the game already, they aren't impossible to beat otherwise. The game pulls a bit of a sneaky on the back of the box by saying there's 10 scenarios, but the entire Souls section is counted as scenarios 2 through 9, which are obviously drastically shorter than White Lizard Island and the endgame. Some of these are like 5 screens, how is that a scenario? A lot of the features in this box are kinda BS or highly exaggerated. The whole latter half section of the game feels so much more lonely or desolate. The areas are huge. This area especially made me feel so uncomfortable. Something about how small Ulm is compared to everything else. It feels like I'm playing a third-person view of myself at 4 years old trying to navigate my home at night to get a glass of water. I know many a zoomer gets the willies from these early 3D environments, but with Dragon Tycoon Edge, it's different. There was something that kept coming up when I asked people about this game. It just feels uncomfortable. It's dreamlike, esoteric, odd. That's partially because most of the people I spoke to were from America, so a language barrier is in play, but even Japanese fans have reported feeling this unnerving sense of being watched and kind of sad at the same time. That lingering feeling of dread and impending doom compounding from the narrative is in full effect here. Each area has its own representation of something horrible, disturbing, and miserable happening. The soundtrack does an incredible amount of atmosphere building, and I have a lot to say about it. The soundtrack was composed by a gentleman named Yasuyuki Fujimori, who was attached to a scattershot of projects in the late 90s, but it seems like he remained a proper music composer onwards, at least into the late 2000s. He seems a lot more comfortable making jazz tracks, funnily enough, but the demonstrated range between these funky beats and these atmospheric, dissonant noises of Tycoon Edge are a huge shock.
Sunny, yesterday my life.
3DO hardware documentation is almost non-existent, but some extremely dedicated fans have made the impossible possible. Thankfully, I didn't have to record this game's soundtrack manually because it's all been uploaded onto YouTube, thanks to one Tori of the Star Palace, who was able to rip these tracks, alongside members of an Usamu Satu fan Discord. Tori explained that the process to actually obtain these files was uniquely frustrating. Various tools obtained from Russian forum posts had to be used in order to rip the files, which were a variable mix of MIDIs and sound samples. We spoke, and they described the technical details they were able to understand as endearingly alien as the gameplay itself. The me that obtained a bachelor's degree in programming and the me that makes a living from Google are basically separate entities, so I have no idea how programming and making games for the 3DO really worked, but I can't imagine Tycoon Edge was a bastion of excellent design and clean code. From here on, I explored at my leisure. I first went to this crystal area, got some key items from a jester, but it didn't look like I was strong enough to beat the guardian of a volcano, let alone the boss, so I went another route. Oh yeah, I should mention these two. These guys are Dada and Lulu, though it's unclear which is which. They're looters, treasure hunters, and they show up a couple times to give you some advice or take you for a ride in their spaceship at specific intervals. Along with that crag lizard and another character, Felina, there are 3 distinct recurring entities that either offer advice or shuttle you elsewhere, which means that Dragon Tycoon Edge had no faith in its players to figure anything out beyond just telling them what to do to their face. Now, to be fair, this actually was very common in a lot of early 3D games. A lot of Mario 64's tutorials were right in your face or on signboards because a lot of gamers had no idea how to play 3D games at the time. Tycoon Edge is a much simpler game to control than Mario 64, but I remember being confused as hell the first time I played Ocarina of Time. It's just a remnant of a bygone era that kids today don't have a chance to experience. But these technological jumps that required a lot of explanations. I already said I was born in the 2000s, but I started with the Super Nintendo and the Game Boy. So going from that to the N64 and later the PS2, I skipped the PS1 for some reason, was still mind-boggling. We just don't get those kind of leaps anymore. The last 2 generations all kind of look exactly the same but with slightly higher resolution. Sometimes those ported games look even worse. The 3DO was definitely not the PS1, but many people had their first taste of the third dimension here. Sorry, what was I saying? You get insta-killed this temple here without a specific item, so the only choice I had at the moment was this foggy bridge, a genuinely creepy area with an equally atmospheric track backing it. You have to obtain these stupid orbs from a rock and then walk over to another rock in order to activate certain locations. Like this dragon head that gives you some seeds, or this actual boss location, or a preview of the Fog Empire where you are insta-killed by a robot. Which combination leads to what? Fine, I don't know, man. Whatever. What am I even inserting these orbs into? Just some hole in the ground that shifts the bridge's location? Here's where we can find the Time Fiend, Crocker. Not exactly a very badass name for someone called the Time Fiend, but whatever. He looks unique and has a delightfully cocky tone as he addresses you.
私の魂が欲しいのかねやろうじゃないか
If you choose to fight this guy first, please just use the dog enemy. The game actually throws you a bone here and gives you one of the best alien choices right before a boss fight, which is normally something I would criticize in literally any other game, but all bets are off with this one, bud. If you've saved one of these crystals that restore health and MP, no problem. But if not, you might need to do the fight a couple times. I lost a ton of progress because I didn't have one of these crystals, so I had to reset back to when I first entered Causeville, find an alien with the crystal, then obtain the dog body to fight Crocker. I used all my save states at specific locations just to reset back to them if I unknowingly set up my entire game wrong and needed to start over. And if you've played this on actual hardware, you get 3 slots, buddy. Good luck. We can track the souls we obtain in our main menu, so I'm assuming Crocker was the first intended target? I don't know. It still feels weird to steal this guy's identity. It's noted in later encounters that none of the bodies we steal ever speak because Alm just chooses not to speak. Imagine one of your friends suddenly going mute and killing you out of nowhere. because he got possessed by an alien. Just a lot of little details of surprisingly thorough world building in a game where everything looks and feels like it was made in 5 seconds. By complete accident, I found a sword by using items when I went back to the island through the painting in the hub area by loosely following a video from this channel here, which was the closest thing I had to a walkthrough. I think you need this sword you obtained from a chest not to fight the Guardian here, or something like that. I don't know, man. The sword does have some lore to it. It was apparently the sword used by a holy warrior, Aram, after he slew a dragon. Keep that name in mind, just in case. Once I got access to the volcano and its disgusting music track, the game decides to pull a genuinely evil maneuver. You have to go through a gauntlet of enemies you can't possess, which means your health and especially MP are draining constantly, which acts as a test to see if you have a powerful enough body. But just before the last foe in this encounter, the game wipes away your MP entirely. Look at that, I didn't even notice. So you have to clear this gauntlet, then leave to find another body to take on the boss? Pourquoi? What a dick move. There are a lot of instances of something unnecessarily cruel happening to you out of nowhere, in case you haven't noticed, and one of the more shocking events is when I noticed, just out of the blue, Alm lost 4 levels. Look, I spoke to an NPC, and maybe he said something in Japanese, I don't know, and I went from level 6 to level 2. I lost 4 levels in the blink of an eye. I guess they don't really matter at this point, but I can think of one game ever that's de-leveled your character, and that was a punishment for dying. What was my punishment here? Speaking to a critical NPC? Do you understand why I was so harsh about this game as I introduced it? You need to talk to this guy. At least I'm pretty sure you do. It's enough to make an old man cry. Thankfully, you don't need to plan too aggressively for this boss fight because the spell Crocker gave us can actually come in handy. I think it works like a general debuff spell that halves attack power and defense or something like that. It makes foes larger and stronger if they use it, but smaller and weaker if you use it. It uses a ton of MP. So as long as this guy doesn't use his meteorite attack too much, this fight is actually reasonable. So we met with this prince character, Sigil, but he kind of just dies and doesn't give us the fire soul. Okay. I still couldn't access that temple, so I was utterly lost for a long time. By this point, I had played around 7 hours total. It was a brutal 7 hours. But would you believe me if I said it only got way worse from here? I didn't know what to do, so I contacted you. He told me to stand at this specific spot to summon this guy, who I remember from an old memory to give breadcrumbs in exchange for a favor. But here's something brutal. This is wrong. What do you think I meant by that? Maybe there are other steps involved with giving him breadcrumbs? No, the breadcrumb item is worthless. It does nothing. It is a dud item. What you actually need to give him is perfume. Then he opens up some kind of gate for you. I actually can't fathom why this is the case. All the voice acting and memories in the game says breadcrumbs, and there's a breadcrumbs item. So why the hell does the perfume do the trick? They actually forget to switch the flags between items? Are you fucking kidding me? You did all that voice acting and programming work and just attached it to the wrong item? I guess I should be thankful that you can even beat this game because of how shoddily it's programmed. But was this segment play-tested? Was any of this game play-tested? I found out way too late that these red spheres are actually homes you can walk into to obtain items. So imagine my shock as I mashed yes through a conversation and obtained a pair of underwear as an inventory item. There are a couple conversations where I obviously had no idea what they were saying, but they're as simple as just saying yes and receiving an item, so there's no downside to just mashing through these. Those panties are actually crucial. You need to give them to these guys in a green room in order to obtain a mirror that deflects the insta-kill shot in the temple area. Look at this setup here. 3 identical elders, as the game calls them, that demand panties from whatever the hell this thing is in order to give you a mirror, and they're all in this plain green room. I don't even know what they're doing. They're playing like a jigsaw puzzle? Why are there pedestrian houses here? What's going on? I guess it's a town, but there's no homeliness here. This game is weirdly, horny. Most lady aliens are given some kind of description or implication that they're into you somehow. The 3D technology was so new but Sala chose to model the Gorgon snake lady with a weirdly pronounced ass. One of these spheres reveals some kind of water room housing the spirit of another dead prince, the Leeks, who we learn more about as we gain access to the temple and meet one of his old guardians, who doesn't seem to know his prince is dead. From what I understand, Lelix was a prince of the Forest Kingdom before the Fog Empire's takeover, and he was undergoing some kind of training or ritual in this water room to improve the kingdom somehow, which ended up going horribly wrong because I'm pretty sure he drowned to death in there. His restless spirit explains this as we finish the temple area, which is so boring, there's basically nothing to explain otherwise, and we can find an item called the King's Mask that we need to bring back to him to the water room to obtain his soul. It's kind of hilarious that this guy managed to accidentally drown to death, but for how young his voice actor sounded, I think this prince was a child who was trying to manage his kingdom the best he could, but just made a fatal mistake. There are almost no happy NPCs here. Everyone is suffering in their own ways, making this a shockingly dour story to experience. The fact there's no forests around here should be clues enough on how well this guy's kingdom has managed itself during the Empire's conquest. I went back to the hub to go meet the prince again, but I ran into a problem. A massive problem. That water room just didn't show up. I tried going to every single red orb, even restarting from a previous save file over and over, but that room just vanished. Panic set in. Did I somehow lose a key item I needed to access that room? Is the room programmed to only appear a limited amount of times and I just ran out? Was there another time limit I didn't know about? Given that researching the existence of this game is hard enough and there are no walkthroughs, I was panicking pretty hard. I still only had 1 out of 5 souls. How am I supposed to beat this game? Throughout my tumultuous search, I found out something horrible. Apparently, there's a bug where sometimes the flags for locations and items just don't show up, meaning you can soft lock yourself and you have to play that part over again. I tried restarting the emulator, even reinstalling the whole core, loading from ancient save files, but there was something staring me in the face the whole time, but I just didn't want to acknowledge it. I felt it in my heart. My very soul screamed it. If I wanted to meet that prince again, I would need to restart that game from the beginning and play it again. That sounds dramatic, but what else could I do? Was there any other shot? All that suffering, all that misery and wasted time and blood and sweat and tears just to get to this point, only to run into a dead end? Would I really spend so much time playing that game again? I did it. I created a brand new save file and played the game from the beginning from White Lizard Island. It was a much shorter playthrough since I knew where to go and what to do for the most part, but I need to illustrate my dread and suffering more prominently. I came to the painful realization I needed to restart around 1 o'clock on a Tuesday, and when I restarted the game and played again, I felt nothing. I dreaded every time I had to touch my PlayStation controller to play this game. Booting up my emulator was physically painful. I dreaded sleep because when I woke, I knew my entire day would be dedicated to Dragon Tycoon Edge. Everything that heard about this game was back to haunt me. Whatever wounds I had healed were reopened and slathered in vinegar. Most people would simply give up here, but I'm not so easily deterred. I never wanted to stop playing and go to sleep, even as I gamed in the wee hours of the morning. And why should I? My life is better than my dreams. My job is playing games like these for the entertainment of thousands. I am truly blessed and I will never forget it, because no one else would want to put up with this game as much as I have. I was doing hot sauce shots at this point. I was losing my mind. I just wanted to thank all of you viewers, you brothers and sisters who've stuck around to this point. We've hit 100,000 subscribers recently, and that's not something I'm taking lightly. Not in a million years. My life has been forever altered by this, and if I can thank you in any way, it's by not skimping out and putting in 100%, which is why I buckled up and played this game again. I made it back to Causeville and was brainstorming with you to progress, and imagine my shock when I realized the red orb rooms change with every door here you enter, which means all I had to do was enter this door and you can make the water room appear at any time. I played the entire game again for nothing. I can think of no better moment than to now advertise my channel on Patreon. Every bit of support helps in these trying times, and these long-form video game videos don't come out of thin air. The more support I get, the quicker and higher quality these videos become. I'm begging you, please don't let another Dragon Tycoon Edge happen. Well, now we can meet the prince and get another sword we can't equip. Great. Oh god. Turns out he has the wind soul and not the water soul. Well, no wonder he drowned. You know what would really sting after I got stuck for a really long time?
Getting stuck immediately after.
I still didn't have the fire soul, but how you end up getting the fire soul it's like the dumbest thing ever. You get a fruit from a guy in Cosville, and you need to return to the foggy bridge to use it on nothing, which causes Felina to appear out of nowhere and give you another item that allows you to possess Sigil and get the fire soul. Whatever, man. Why? Just give me the damn soul. Why did you program this? Why? None of the other souls do this, man. So we've got 3 to 5 souls, and the next one is right around the corner. Back through the volcano, that crystal opens a side door that leads us to this mysterious tower somewhere in space-time, which only becomes stranger when we enter. The basement floors act as prisons full of different aliens being punished for their crimes against the Empire. But the middle floors, I think they're brothels? You have to talk to a saucy NPC to obtain a key card to meet this guy, Bro Mandel, amazing name, is some kind of prisoner imprisoned for 1,000,000 years who really likes to make other inmates fight each other to the death. He's a pretty easy fight, so you take his body, go back to that lady to get another key card to find the right floor to find the latest soul. You best be careful exploring because many of these rooms have backup aliens. So the ideal method to play is to save, then explore the tower, then reset to gain an easy understanding of the area. That brothel area is especially uncomfortable. There are several of these bedrooms you need to pass through in order to fight the final boss here, which are guarded by whatever these things are, whose 2 attacks are either blizzards or throwing it back. You actually want them to do this for strategy reasons, because unlike most other foes, their physical attacks do almost no damage for some reason. Since there are scarcely any restoration crystals through scenarios 2 to 9, I had to hedge my bets and hope I would get a face full of ass and have time to restore my MP. But this led me to finding yet another moment of excessive cruelty from the game. If you lose against either of these two, the game still makes you transform into one of them, and then the boss refuses to fight you because of it. Like, what? I lost this fight. Why did I turn into this thing? The entire gimmick of the game is momentarily flipped backwards just as a means to punish me. One could argue it's a method to ensure I'm not too weak, but Bro Mandel is the best possible body you can obtain in the tower. Otherwise, you would need to lose the last preliminary foe, leave the tower, go find another strong alien on the other side of Edge, and come back if you lose. I think we all understand how horribly implemented the difficulty is in this game, but I felt like I hit new lows over and over again. Some new way to twist the knife and waste my time and remind me that most of my friends are starting families while I'm playing Dragon Tycoon Edge. I don't like how these aliens look. They're in chains and they have these blinders on, and given how all of these rooms are clearly bedrooms with alcohol and there's a nearby prison, what am I supposed to interpret these characters as? Empire sex slaves? Ugh, it's disgusting. It really hammers home how vile the Fog Empire is and how these aliens are suffering. I mean, these ones kind of seem into it. I eventually won and got to the boss, Celine, some kind of lady pirate standing in our way. She's actually pretty easy, which makes this whole gauntlet even that much more pointless. When we win, we're told that she is the last member of her race, some kind of water species wiped out by the Empire's 3 executives, and then we're given the Water Soul, giving us 4 to 5. Celine's race obviously isn't around anymore, but I'm curious as to her exact role in the story. She's a pirate, so her exact allegiance to anything is questionable. She's around associates of the Empire, so perhaps she's reluctantly tolerant, given that her race was made extinct by the Empire, and Alm, of course. She says something about joining our cause once we win this fight, but I guess that begs the question why she couldn't just join us without a fight that resulted in her death. The memories we get are especially interesting by this point. We get more sneaky clues about this Aram character, about how he was a rebel hero who entered the Imperial Tower to stop the Empire, but was never heard from again. So perhaps we may find our answer inside. But how do we get to the tower? It's not through that weird picture in the foggy bridge area, it's actually on the top floor of this tower. We talk to a mad scientist who recognizes how dangerous Out Neon is, and as long as we have the sword Alex gave us, we can be teleported into the Imperial Tower. I find it interesting that despite not being able to use that sword whatsoever, we needed to stop the Empire. Like, symbolically, we are finishing what Aram started, and the royal family presumably tried to aid in by somehow taking up their blades and cutting off Out Neon's head or whatever. It's actually quite cool in a clumsy, dark fantasy way. It's curious that Alm is some kind of miracle birth from that unnamed goddess at the start, whomever she is. Like, Edge was so doomed she had to just pump out a baby to solve her problems. The lack of explanation, but recurring mythological tropes makes this game feel like you're playing an interactive cultural legend from another universe, like an inverse epic from Greek myth told from an oracle high on fentanyl. The Imperial Tower means business. It's narrow and incredibly cramped, a stark contrast to most areas being very open-ended. For the first time in the whole video game, it actually feels like a dungeon crawler, but it turns out this was the game's fatal mistake. We need to get to the 4th floor of this tower, but the elevator won't let us go up quite yet. So do we need to defeat a boss or get an item? Not quite. You actually need to clear the entire tower of enemies. Half of these enemies are these Imperial robots that specifically do not have souls, so no transformations. There's like 20 of these things throughout the 3 floors, but since the place is crawling with enemies, you can easily transform into another alien whenever you get low. It doesn't seem like an unreasonable request, right? Right? Well, here's the cruel twist of fate. You aren't fighting new enemies, of course, just recycled ones, bosses included. Now, just because this tower is far more linear doesn't mean that enemies are placed anywhere reasonable. Most of the time, they're in the walls or other locations you wouldn't think to check, which means if you actually want to clear this tower and beat this game, you need to do a full 360 degrees rotation on every single tile. Every single one of them. Have you ever done Feebas fishing in Gen 3 or 4 of Pokemon, where you have a 50% chance each tile on a lake to get the encounter you want, but you're never told which tiles? You have to do that for 4 total floors of this tower, hearing the same battle theme, mashing attacks, healing sometimes, and becoming an expert on wasted time management. As far as I know, nothing in the game tells you to do this. There's no global count or progression bar or any way to tell that you've actually cleared a floor. You just have to check if the 4th floor is unlocked, and if it isn't, you just search through all 3 floors to see if you didn't bump into the right wall to spawn another fuckatron you previously missed. The game is also just out of memories by the time you get here, so every time you win a fight, it just cuts to your new body and like you maybe get an item. Do I really need to rant about how much time this wastes? I've wasted 2 hours going through the floors over and over again just to find there was a guy in one wall I missed. One fucking wall. You couldn't have just added some kind of progression measurement system? Lock each floor until you clear them sequentially? Come on! I just really struggled to believe that they really thought this was the best way to layer the final dungeon. I'm not convinced I'm not accidentally playing a Khmer Rouge torture device designed to fry people's brains. It's like every possible game design choice was a maximalized effort to personally offend and brutalize you. We're at the end, and there's still a knife twist at the end, just beyond. Having to fight every single enemy did wonders for our experience, however, which I literally forgot about. I jumped several levels in this tower, which begs the question why these metrics are even on display or included in-game if every fight is basically predetermined. There's no avoiding any fights here, you have to clear everything. Years before, Final Fantasy VIII would make consumers question why they still kept the level system even though it's pointless. Dragon Tycoon Edge says, "Hold my White Claw." It's like they were scared of the player being under-leveled, but forgot to make levels matter at all. Once I finally got to the 4th floor and wiped out a very pathetic boss gauntlet, we ran into an unexpected figure. Remember this guy? Who was on all the advertising in 1994. And it turns out, it's Aram. The evil Pope himself, Hector, yes that's his name, explains that Aram was the hero who tried to stop the Fog Empire, but failed, and he was killed in combat. The Empire repurposes his body as a tool of destruction under Hector's control, and now you've got to fight him. It's understated, but it is a genuinely tragic encounter. It's like fighting the real Zero at the end of Mega Man Zero. You're up against the previously failed hero, and it's a similarly tough, but actually fair fight. I mean, it lacks the amazing music track and much more narrative build-up and a fun game surrounding it, but whatever. As long as you know he's there, you have the choice of literally any of the previous bosses to fight him with. And you should have the most powerful spell currently, this Icicle spell. You should also have at least 2 crystals that restore health and MP, but Aram deals a ton of damage. Those crystals tip the balance in your favor, but if you just had easier access to bodies, you could make the argument this combat system is accidentally fun. It just needs to be totally overhauled is all. Once you win that fight, the final body is obtained, and Aram is given the chance to slaughter Hector once and for all, who proves to be an easy fight. There was definitely an intentional story decision to make Aram the final obtainable body. Not only does he have the final soul you need to defeat the Empire, the Soul of Light, he was also the closest thing Edge had to a hero standing up to the Fog Empire. And you can see it in his design through the memories of other aliens. He kind of looks like a knight, but with his glittering metal armor. He slew dragons with a powerful sword. His symbolic connection to light, and even the final spell you get is some kind of light or holy magic. Edge knew about Aram and his previous heroic deeds, but none seemed to know that he ultimately failed his heroic journey and became a puppet to the Empire. In the advertising, we can see what looks like a scene of Hector attacking Aram. Now, do I think this was a bit of intentional narrative genius from Sala International? I'm skeptical. Perhaps Aram was just one of the first models they made for advertising, but I can't help but feel at some point Aram was supposed to be the original hero of this game, but they decided to give him a dark ending and made him a puppet to the Empire, unknowingly crushing the rebellions that he led and inspired. But now that Ulm has come, Aram has a symbolic second chance to finish what he started, with his original sword and the royal family that was crushed. The 5 souls might seem arbitrary, but they might be more symbolic than people realize. Aram, the Leeks, and Sigil's souls are all people who rebelled against the Empire, holy beings with enormous social influence and respect. Celine holds some kind of unspecified clout as a pirate, but perhaps chose to vaguely align with the Empire so as not to become a target for her own powerful water soul. Crocker seems he's kinda gung-ho on being a bad guy, but whatever a time fiend is sounds pretty powerful. Each soul is the manifestation of their powerful beings, most of which oppose the Empire. There are a lot of items and figures and overall recurring motifs of the failure of the precursors happening here. It blankets Edge, and even in the previous topics, in a meta sense. Trip Hawkins failed to make the 3DO a success. Sala International in this game failed to become the next big thing. Silvio is no longer in the games industry. Throughout this video, I have been establishing a consistent pattern of a person or company failing the first time around, but failure is perhaps the greatest teacher one could ever ask for. Failure has the opportunity to make us succeed in ways far greater than what we initially planned for, and it's so strong that it begins to blur the lines between fiction and reality. And this is no more evident in Aram's initial failure leading the way to Ulm's final success against the Empire. Once you find a secret passage on the 4th floor, yeah, I wasn't exactly pleased looking for this, but they do strongly imply where it is in a memory, we meet... Actually, I don't know. This guy doesn't have a name whatsoever. I think he's another executive of the Empire, but that's just implicit. He's a bad guy, but it's pretty grim that he is genuinely confused why Aram isn't obeying his orders, and has zero clue Ulm is in control here. This fight is pathetically easy because Aram is ridiculously strong. It doesn't even matter you fight him 3 times for some reason. You just do so much damage and have such a giant MP pool that you can take whatever he can throw at you. And you've got a whole stockpile of crystals that can heal all damage, so you actively have to try and lose. And you even get another crystal right after this fight. Up this whatever this is, we get to our final boss, who also doesn't have a name. I'm just left to assume that this is our 3rd and final executive, and this one somehow knows who Ulm is, for once. And would you believe me if I said this was the easiest fight in the entire game? I'm not kidding. Look at how little damage he does. Look at that. He doesn't even attack most turns. He skips half of his turns, then uses the other half for pathetically weak attacks that do basically nothing. I'm using deliberately weak spells just to capture footage of the guy's attacks. He has one magical attack that does a ton of damage, but you automatically get a restoration crystal before this fight. So you have to A, intentionally waste all health crystals or use none of them. B, use the weakest attacks possible to deal as little damage as possible. Or C, just wait to die. I've heard of the term shooting yourself in the foot before to describe an intentional handicap, but you have to completely cripple yourself physically, mentally, and spiritually to lose this fight. Have you ever heard of a game that started out the maximum possible difficulty and ends with the easiest possible fight in the game? It's like every time they tried to make a challenging fight, they failed, but the intended features meant to be fun and thrilling all backfired in the most vicious way electronically possible. I was genuinely expecting some of these attacks to de-level your character, do something kind of outrageously inconvenient, like an instant death. There's no instant death, just some thoughtlessly cruel maneuver meant to decimate my already weary soul. How is the final boss less of a threat than a random powerful enemy within the first hour of the game? That's something that can only manifest from just pure incompetent game design, something beyond our wildest speculations. And I highly doubt this fight was made intentionally easy to prove a story point, unless Out Neon is secretly Yu Yevon. I also found that Aram gave us another attack spell, a Thunderbolt spell, but it deals less damage than the light spell we get at the same time, so there's literally 0 point to using it. Normally I would laugh, or even feel disappointed, but I felt empty. I felt nothing as I watched this guy die and approach this voiced machine who is also unnamed. I don't know if this is the holy machine Out Neon, or if Out Neon is just projecting his voice. I really don't know, nor do I really care. What I do know is what's being said, thanks to you. The voices say the judgment of the universe is finished, the impending doom we've been racing against the clock for. Alm refuses to accept this and decides to just break Out Neon, which I guess softly confirms this device is Out Neon. This figure's final words are screaming and begging for Alm not to break Out Neon, or else the universe will head to ruin. Alm refuses to listen and proceeds to break Out Neon, which is where the game ends and fades into the credits. So the ending is left up to our interpretation, whether Edge survives or not. If Alm saved it or destroyed it for some ambiguous reason, and I felt nothing short of lacrimosa as the credits scrolled. What do I even say? I've spent over an hour recapping and explaining this game in depth more than anyone else on planet Earth, and what do I have to show for it? My wasted experience and time with this horrific nightmare of a video game? There was almost nothing implemented correctly or in a way that doesn't greatly inconvenience the player, if not outright crippling them. The DNA, the foundation of this product, is rotten to the core. The battle system is almost broken, the navigation is incompetent, the difficulty is completely unbalanced and unpredictable, there are details in the story and guides that are flat out incorrect, it requires the IQ of a Severance fan or hours of constant repetition and do-overs to progress past level 1 and not even know if that was intentional. It's a game so confusing and all over the place you have to question authorial intent here. I think on some level the repetition was to artificially expand the playtime, but hand on the Bible, I don't know if they were intending to make a game this outwardly hostile to the player, this unforgivingly punishing, this catastrophically built. It's this foul concoction of bad game design, intentional and often not intentional. Have you ever had a come to Jesus moment while playing a video game, where you realize how much time you've sunk into playing something that was absolutely not worth it? I've had like 5. So many times I've put my controller down and remembered that most of my friends are out there starting families and living life, all while I'm at home having one of, if not the worst video game experiences I've ever had. The good Lord could have taken me at any point during this game. My last thoughts could have been, wait, how do I get that dog alien again? It's the worst dungeon crawl I've ever played, based solely on how cryptic and unforgiving it is. And believe me when I say that genre is infamous for that cryptic nonsense, and it suddenly found its king. You best be afraid. And I know that some of this is because of the language barrier, but even people who speak Japanese have like the same problems. Key details and clues are on screen for 5 seconds, and if you're not recording or paying attention, you're out of luck. It has all the nonsense difficulty of a third-party NES game meant to increase renting sales with all the wicked gameplay of a ROM hack meant to brutally sodomize whoever plays it. Bits and pieces of terrible moments from other games are all stitched together to make this Frankenstein's monster of a product. I've never seen anything like this. This game doesn't feel like it was intended for human hands. It's some kind of mad science experiment for aliens. It doesn't play normal. It doesn't look normal. It isn't! It's like if King Solomon commanded his demons to learn how to code, and this is what they made. I don't think I've ever been this upset over a video game in my life. I have spent so much time trying to play and explain this game for what? For what? But maybe there's a silver lining. This game is terrible. I think we all understand that, but there is something charming about how alien everything is. Even if it was really frustrating, I actually like how different it is and how different it looked. The battle system is horribly designed, but incredibly unique. The story, for what little of it there is very somber and depressing. Everyone is miserable and the stars have a set timer for destruction. Everyone else who's tried to stop the Empire has failed. Except for you. In the truest sense of the word, you're the hero this world needs, and there aren't many other video games that illustrate your narrative importance more than this one. It's such a freaky piece of outsider art, and out of all RPGs I've ever played, nothing comes within the same real galaxy as this one in terms of being such an eclectic mix of whatever this is. It has this miserable, downcast tone in its characters and world and atmosphere that has never touched me quite as strongly as it has now. I don't have all the words for it, I'm genuinely speechless. I can point to 1,000 dark RPGs, 1,000 indie games aping that early 3D style, 1,000 soundtracks that try to achieve the same droning, lonely ambience, but nothing comes close. Dragon Tycoon Edge is in a league of its own, and for that, I actually respect this game tremendously, even if it's horrible to the core. To try and salvage this game, you would almost need to gut it entirely. Completely overhaul progression, remove the limited save crystal system, and maybe put save points, add more complexities between aliens and magic spells, have way more consistent ways to recover MP and HP, remove all those stupid pointless ways to aggravate the player, have a system that records each memory, fix the outright mistakes in the game, and ideally just give all that more polish. There was also a bug I ran into where sometimes enemies just wouldn't spawn, and I was totally soft-locked during their intended encounters. But I'm gonna be charitable and assume that was an emulator bug maybe? But at that point, implementing all of those changes would give us a Ship of Theseus argument, where the original identity of Dragon Tycoon Edge is so different to this proposed change that it might as well be an entirely different entity. Trying to quantify this game's impact on people in the market is basically impossible because of its release window, which might sound strange. There is tons of recorded information on games from the 90s in America, but Japan didn't really follow suit for the most part. Archives of development documents or interviews weren't a priority, so a lot of this information is just straight up not online whatsoever, which is partially why Sala International is so hard to research for. It's entirely possible that everything relating to this game just wasn't put online. Magellar had something especially noteworthy to say about this.
Being in contact with one of the developers and talking to people who have more firsthand experience with the game, it's that the stuff like that is what's so important, because otherwise you have a bunch of people. It's sort of like the bystander effect, but video game history edition.
Yeah,
where it's I'm sure that there's interviews or whatever, I don't really care type of thing, and everybody sort of assumes that all this stuff is cataloged and everything, but then if everybody assumes that, then nobody bothers to actually go and conduct an interview or sit down and talk to the people who are holding on to that valuable history. And once they die, we're getting to the point where those first few generations of game developers are getting kind of old now. And once they pass away, all of that is gone. Any chance, any hope you would have ever had to learn about these things goes with them. So yeah, I don't know. It's important. It's more important than people give it credit for.
In a couple more decades, intimate knowledge of this game might just vanish forever because of a lack of preservation, and it's what partly inspired me to make this very video. It's depressing to think that something that took so much effort and consideration and love will just be forgotten one day. It makes me self-conscious about how much human achievement and expression will be taken to our graves and forgotten by the living. Dragon Tycoon Edge came out for a whopping 8,800 yen on release, piece, which is basically the same price as a AAA video game here in Canada, which is pretty tough. Again, no idea how many people bought this exactly, but it seems like it might have been enough. Because in 1996, Sala International released another game called Ukoku no Grand Chef for the same platform, which features a celebrity inclusion in the form of Yukio Hattori, a famous commentator on the Iron Chef show, though most people called him Dr. Hattori in the show. Seems like he passed away last year. Rest in peace, and always a pleasure. I assume that either Dragon Tycoon Edge somehow made enough money to fund another game, or Sanyo Electronics just gave them money anyways to self-publish another title. I don't know. Grand Chef seems like a much more traditional JRPG from appearances, but I'd rather slice my dick open with a potato peeler than play another 3D RPG right now. Regardless of whatever happened there, Sala International stopped making games after 1996. Most of the staff either never made another game, or were involved together in some Sega Saturn puzzle games. After that, it's impossible to tell what happened. Perhaps Sala International returned to video editing, but if they were around today, surely there would have been some public online record of their existence past their video games if they survived. It's equally likely that the company went bankrupt and simply folded. We just don't know. What is certain is that Dragon Tycoon Edge did not change the RPG genre as we know it. It came and went, and the genre moved on without it. The PlayStation console was what ultimately shifted the RPG genre, with titles like Final Fantasy VII being the true breakthrough title to change RPGs forever and gain a nearly worldwide release. Ultimately, Dragon Tycoon Edge failed. I should be elated to be not only one of the only people to beat this game, but to understand it. But it's all built up as longing and dread within me. I felt it for days now. There isn't another game like Dragon Tycoon Edge, and that pains me. I've looked far and wide, high and low for a game that evokes this particular feeling within me, this esoteric, awe, grief-stricken feeling within me, but nothing has ever come close. It was a mostly miserable experience playing this game, but that misery was a once-in-a-lifetime feeling that I'll never have again. And it left an impression on me, to say the least. Maybe it's my mind trying to justify all the time I spent researching and playing the game, but if part of me I don't entirely understand misses that feeling of finding the game for the first time, getting in contact with the people who've provided key evidence and recollections to make this video possible. Is it possible to feel nostalgia for something you hated doing? I didn't even realize I was making memories while I played this game. I was just in the moment. I made obscure games like this part of my online identity and channel brand because I think I liked the attention and aura of being some kind of guru or guide in knowledge and information that most people weren't aware of. Not that I would only play and talk about the games solely for that reason. I actually enjoy the medium and the games I talk about. But there was a dimension to this game revealed in its obscurity that particularly spoke to me. I've kind of hit a wall here. An obscure game from an unknown developer with ridiculous gameplay that basically no one knows about, let alone understands. Where do you go from there? There are technically more obscure games and platforms, but in my mind, that book feels closed. The bone's picked clean, there's no more to write on the page. We'll never really know what happened to Sala International, they're just a ghost. So why did I even bother making this video at all? Where do I go from here? This chapter might feel out of place, but I promise it's crucial to the overall theme and motif I want to establish: failure and eventual reward. Something unique about this game is that the ones most affected by its individual qualities, I'll call them, played it at a pivotal time in their lives, and I was no exception. December 2024. I recall it was an especially miserable time for me because the holidays always tended to make people spiral out of control, and that anecdote was proven true beyond a shadow of a doubt. People were especially aggressive and irritating at my old butchery job, and I was especially dreading having to work on Christmas Eve and Boxing Day. I was part-time with that, and the other half of my time was dedicated to this, YouTube. Video creation was something I've always wanted to do since I was a child watching Some Ordinary Gamers. But now that I was coming up on a second full year of doing it, I wasn't really sure where to go. I was staying at my parents' place for a couple days over the holidays, but they were vacationing in America at the time, which left me alone. On the days I stayed over at their house to watch the dog that used to be mine before I left, I stayed in the room that used to be my childhood room. I moved around a lot as a kid, so I never really viewed one location as my concrete home, but I was in that house for around 12 years. It's hard to describe how it feels to return to a room that used to be decorated with your belongings and toys now stripped bare, but in retrospect, I scarcely slept those nights. It was my Xanarkand. I don't think I need to explain why a retail job would make someone bitter and upset very easily, but I was well beyond my limit at that point. It infuriated me that I had one foot in what was essentially my dream job, and the other in this horrible dead-end place that inspired nothing but torment in me. I recall driving home in the early hours of Christmas morning. The sun had just begun to rise, but the thick blanket of gray clouds cloaked the streets with this ashy malaise feeling. When I pulled into my lone driveway to my house, a certain song had begun to play through a randomized playlist. Radiohead's How to Disappear Completely. It's a lovely song, one of my favorites from an incredible album, but it was the worst song fate could have ever selected at that moment. I didn't have the strength to exit the car during that song. I lazily glanced around at nothing in particular, taking in the breadth of the gray skies and morning fog as the song continued. I was seated for the entire length of the track, but at the same time, I wasn't. I dissociated in that moment and sort of viewed my life in third person, if that makes sense. These were ostensibly my memories, but for just a moment, I could be an impartial party, viewing these events in a linear sequence, like I was watching a motion picture of someone else's life. I saw that I was annoyed that I had turned 23 just a couple months prior and was still so attached to a job that I hated, just to support myself while, and I guess in my mind, I'd felt I had failed to work hard enough in my true passion. I guess in a way I was kind of worried that my time was sort of near, if that makes sense. It wasn't rational, but I thought something dreadful. If I were to just drop dead that day on December 25th, 2024, I don't think I would have died very satisfied with my current achievements. I felt like I ultimately had failed at this nebulous goal of life in some grand cosmic way. That theme of failure connected to this game and platform, and even this very video had permeated. Of course, I was just being overdramatic and miserable in the moment, so I sobered up and carried on with my life and tried to pretend that epiphany didn't happen. Until I saw some screenshots of this game, Dragon Tycoon Edge. I was totally in love with how this game looked, and I had heard of its relative infamy and obscurity. Something about how the aliens existed as both part of the world and the UI tickled that memory of dissociating I had kept private until now. I felt a rush of passion from a fire in my belly that was foreign to me. I felt like I had grabbed my life by the horns. There was no feeling sorry for myself. I quit my job because I found myself so much prouder of my work. I worked harder, smarter, and a significant part of this tailwind was because I was researching this game like a madman. I'm not the most interesting person in this story, because I think it's time I went into more detail about you. I've mentioned him a couple times, but who is he really? Well, he's a Japanese gentleman who contacted me through a reply on YouTube and then through Twitter/X to talk about the game. Like I mentioned, he provided multiple PDF files about the game, translating a ton of dialogue, enemy names, answering almost any question I had about this game. I had begun to learn his story and how much Dragon Tycoon Edge meant to him. He wasn't just an enthusiast, this was a special game to him. It's easy to laugh at it now, but a fully 3D voice-acted game was an anomaly in 1995. Yu was a gamer, in the truest sense of the word. He loved playing classic From Software titles like Shadow's Tower on the PlayStation with his brother, but Dragon Tycoon Edge was different. Something about the game totally captured his imagination. He recalled rushing home in junior high to go back to playing it at home before finishing his homework. He spent hours just walking around the game world after he cleared it of all enemies, drinking in the ambience and music in that special, formative way that only children can do. It reminds me of playing games like Pokemon Leaf Green and Mario 64, and creating all these little stories and extra side objectives in my head for a never-ending adventure. I would believe basically any rumor someone told me about these games because their sense of exploration and awe they inspired was next to none. Do you know how mad I was when I found out Mew under the truck wasn't real? That was a rumor in Fire Red too, and I totally believed it. For you, Dragon Tycoon Edge was that kind of game. It exists in a special place all people have, even as adults, something that anchors us to a time when we didn't understand the limitations of the games we played with. During the Imperial Tower section, he was stuck and called Sala International hoping for a tip on how to beat it. Shockingly, an employee actually answered the phone and gave him the location of the false wall. He recalled how the employee sounded tired but kind. As an adult, he eventually joined the video game industry working for From Software, the same company that developed many of the games he came to cherish later on. During his tenure there, he was a member of the game designers behind the first 2 Dark Souls games, and a Gundam Universal Century title. I was shocked when I heard this, and I thought I was misreading it, that he was talking about another franchise and not one of the most iconic and important game series in recent memory. But given that he had done all of this translation work and created several documents just to discuss the game with me for free, I had little reason to doubt this. So I just asked plainly, did Dragon Tycoon Edge inspire you to help create Dark Souls? He told me that Dragon Tycoon Edge had inspired him indirectly. Despite how flawed the game was, it had something he dubbed as a game core, kind of soul-like aspect that's the most important aspect of the game beyond visuals and gameplay. I can just shorthand it by saying it had soul, that kind of nebulous concept we can all sort of understand, but the writing's on the wall. Dragon Tycoon Edge inspired someone enough to join From Software, which eventually led to the contributions of the Dark Souls franchise. I don't know his exact role within the game designer team, but the game just wouldn't have been the same without his contributions. But remember the promise of Dragon Tycoon Edge spoken in 1994, the next generation of RPGs. In a strange, indirect way, Dragon Tycoon Edge did sort of usher in a new age of RPGs by Yu's contribution to Dark Souls, leading to the creation and eventual popularization of the Soulsborne genre that was all the rage for a decade. I can't speak into many specifics with Dark Souls since I haven't played it, but perhaps if you dare to play Dragon Tycoon Edge, maybe you can spot some similarities between the titles. Perhaps something overt, or maybe something deep within the soul of the game. Dragon Tycoon Edge initially failed to change the genre, but eventually that failure led to someone else symbolically taking up the torch with that game in his heart to make something that did change the genre. There's a very specific reason why I've named this chapter From the Ashes, because like a phoenix rising from the ashes, a failure can eventually lead to a win, something that otherwise wouldn't be obtained without that prior failure. Sala and Tycoon Edge eventually helped lead to Dark Souls. Trip Hawkins and the 3DO console may have failed in its heyday, but it led to the creation of several franchises and studios today that changed the landscape, big and small. Plus, Hawkins is still an eccentric millionaire, and the grand 3DO failure sort of buried the other skeletons in the closet, so I'm sure he's fine. Silvio, the gentleman who worked for Sala International, may have been stressed throughout his time in the gaming industry, but he felt wiser because of his experiences. And now he's got a job as a financial market analyst back in Brazil, and seems to be fairly comfortable doing it. Everything that has been built up as a failure or a folly has led to the creation of something even greater for the company or individuals. I have no idea what most of the other developers previously employed at Sala are doing, but even as they left the industry, they probably had better jobs now than they did slaving away in the 3DO. I asked Yu why he was reaching out to me, someone who only spoke English, and the answer was inspiring. He recalled a conversation with the then president of From Software, Naotoshi Jin, who said that Japanese games only had 2% of the global share market, and that inspired Yu to do his part in breaking down the language barrier to share these games with the world. A ROM hack translation of this game would be an enormous amount of effort and work, but just sharing this information online is a pretty good start, and I feel absolutely honored to be someone who received that information. Yu has been an absolute superstar, and talking to him has been nothing short of a magnificent time. If you've made it this far, I ask you to type "Thank you, Yu" in the comments to show your appreciation for him, because his selfless passion is why I was able to release this video. Finding this game has led me to meeting a lot of incredible people. Of course, I met you, I met Silvio, I even got to talk to Magellar about it, someone who constantly inspires me on the site. Though that compounding feeling of accomplishment is still somewhat bittersweet because I don't think I'll ever have an experience like this game again. A game where I really had to sleuth the level I did, to gather information from so many sources, to chart out courses previously unmarked, It felt like I was going on a true odyssey, and now that adventure is over. I returned to my home from this journey, so to speak, but I don't entirely feel like the same person who saw those screenshots for the first time. But maybe it's too hasty to declare that I'll never have it again. If these failures and eventual wins have taught me anything, it's that sometimes you just need to wait things out for this massive dub around the corner. And while I don't really think I feel like I've won in any terms, that's something I'll have to discover for myself later on. Maybe I've already hit my peak on the site, but what I do may inspire someone else to achieve a height that I never could, that permanently alters the platform in a positive way. But that's getting ahead of myself. That's the fun thing about life. When you can't do nothing, but there's nothing you can do, you do what you can. This is all to say, I think I want to talk about some popular games. I don't really feel shackled to just talk about games no one else cares about. Of course, many of my personal favorites happen to be lesser known games, but I think I'm okay with just being a guy who talks about games, instead of only talking about the obscure ones. I felt so inspired by talking to you that I want to take on that long and difficult journey of learning some Japanese to play some of the weirder, untranslated games out there. I already barely speak English, so don't ask me how that's going for a couple of years. I own a copy of this game, but not to play it on official hardware. It's something I want to pull off my shelf every so often and remind myself how far I've come and how much I could still achieve. There's just something you can't quite explain about Dragon Tycoon Edge, but it is something you can understand, even if you don't have the words for it. The great mysteries of this game have been solved, and I'm glad we got to do it together. Let's end this video on a high note.
Let me tell you a little story. It goes like this. My life was A-okay. I had a job at Zales, and with my fresh technique, I was employee of the week. But one night on the train, very late, pouring rain, someone sat down next to me, touched me. I could feel her icy breath in my ear. What the heck? Whispering a melody. Sweetly she said, let's go to the 35th dimension. Take some of this potion that I'm drinking. All kinds of trouble for us to get in 35th dimension. Well, when I got back home, I kept myself alone, 'cause everything was strange. I had to rearrange my life completely. I don't need anything, sex or drugs or rock and roll. Whoa, no, I just wanna hear her voice, follow it where it goes. Anything that she desires, I'll try. She said, let's go to the 35th dimension. Take some of this potion that I'm drinking. All kinds of trouble for us to get in 35th dimension. There is a price we pay, relying on our brains. 'Cause when we lose the way, no one can ease the pain. No matter where she ranges, she'll always be the same. She'll do her best to love you. That's what she told me. Let's go to the 35th dimension. Take some of this potion that I'm drinking. All kinds of trouble for us to get in 35th dimension. 35th dimension. 35th dimension. 35th dimension. 35th dimension.
Thanks, as always. Hope you'll stick around for the next video. But until then, have a lovely rest of your day. Stay strange. Glass of hot sauce. You know, what could possibly go wrong here?